of studying to be the alchemical art. I find it rather curious.
Isn't it?
Isn't it? I say it's astonishing.
I mean, it is. I mean, the alchemy is, if you do that process, the alchemy is going to happen within you. If you sit and have dialogue
Certainly.
with yourself, it happens.
Of course.
Yeah, oh, okay, good.
Of course. But
I thought I missed something.
no, you're absolutely with it. You see, all I'm saying is that in describing this, he's describing the way alchemists were studying philosophy. When you do it, they'll use this language of alchemy to escape the Inquisition. That's why they were doing it. There were no works published after the 18th century when the Inquisition lost its power. Now look here. Is this an invitation to study philosophy of the ancients? Devote yourself in such a way that psychologically you go through this process which he can understand? Philosophy is not taught this way in the colleges and universities. It's taught as an intellectual dead system. Isn't that curious?
When did that start happening, that it started being taught?
Pardon me?
When did that start happening, that it started being taught dead?
It was never, no. One of the things our culture has done is that, see, there's a very interesting period in history, and maybe I'll give you a quick look at it. For many, many years, since Lactantius and Augustine, especially Lactantius, who started it in the 2nd century AD, one of the fathers of the church, he had what he called the parallels of revelation. Divine revelation and partial revelation. He said divine revelation is through the Old Testament, New Testament, or the Bible. He said there is something curious happened, he said, actually. At the very beginning of the time of Moses, the really old and great Greek philosophers studied with Moses. And therefore, from the Bible, from the very earliest time of Moses through the prophets, you can put next to them all of the great Greek philosophers. Therefore, there are two lines of revelation. Partial revelation based upon reason, and the complete revelation revealed by divine illumination and faith. They're parallel. They're parallel. This was accepted. And they had a very good reason for accepting it. At this point in history, there was I'll just tell you the story quickly. St. Paul went on a journey, and with him was Dionysius, his friend, who he converted. Dionysius was present, according to a letter of Dionysius, at the crucifixion. He was the only person that we know of that was present in the crucifixion. He therefore journeyed with Paul on his missions, and therefore helped in the spread of Christianity, evangelizing Christianity. He is the man who laid the foundation for Christian metaphysics, Catholic metaphysics. One man laid out the whole course of metaphysics. A splendid metaphysics, I want to assure you. Now, I want to represent that here. Now, the thinkers that came after Dionysius, Plotinus, Porphyry, Iamblichus, others, including Proclus, the Christian theologians could look at the writings of Dionysius and say, look what they're doing over here. All they're doing is plagiarizing us, because we have the whole thing in minuscule right here by the writings of Dionysius. Therefore, there wasn't any hostility between the two of them. Christians were quite content knowing that their writings were divinely revealed and anticipated the whole rational development of philosophy and metaphysics. Therefore, it was quite apparent, now you have to think now for a moment, now the writings are coming in from Byzantium. The first time the Greek texts are coming in the first time into Byzantium, into Florence. They're being translated. Now, all of this literature, which had been closed for Europe, is now translated into Latin in a giant effort of intellectual scholarship. All that now comes pouring out. Now they can get these writings themselves and they can see that's the case. They don't have to believe it. They can see it themselves. Oh, by the way, a chap by the name of Lorenzo Valla came along. And if anybody should write a play about Lorenzo Valla, this would be a hit. This is one of the greatest intellectual figures in the European history, and no one studies him. He did many, many things that are truly remarkable. One of the things he did, he learned classic Greek. Everybody who wanted to get into these intellectual ideas jumped in and learned classic Greek. So he went to the church and he said, "Excuse me, I'd like to take a look at this document, this great metaphysics of Dionysius." And he looked at it and he wrote a little letter. The letter said, "I would like to inform you that this work could not have been the work of Dionysius at the time of Jesus Christ. He could not have been at the crucifixion. The whole thing is a forgery, and it's quite evident, as he showed by a perfect line of reasoning, that it must have been written after Proclus, and the whole thing's a forgery."
Is this thing of pseudo-Dionysius?
And that's why he's called pseudo-Dionysius now. He was so powerful a thinker that St. Thomas Aquinas quotes him 1,700 times in his writings. Albert Magnus, the great theologian, 1,100 times. He is the most powerful thinker. He framed Christian metaphysics. Uh-oh. Another thinker came along, Casaubon, Frenchman, and he said, "Gentlemen, I'd like to review this idea of the parallel thesis." And he showed by very careful reasoning and looking at the quotes and the text, he said, "They're not parallel. You got the dates all wrong. Lactantius and Augustine were wrong." What did that do? It means they weren't parallel. It means that many of these things the Greeks preceded the Christians, that they accepted forgeries, and their whole tradition is based upon forgeries. Now, that caused quite a shock in Europe. We don't feel it in this country, but that caused quite a shock in Europe. He did two other things were even more remarkable. He got a copy of the Christian Bible, the Vulgate, St. Jerome's translation, and he compared it with one of the Greek Bibles that came from Byzantium, and he was so shocked he sent a letter to Erasmus, the great Renaissance humanist, and he said, "I'm sorry to tell you this," he said, "but we're facing a crisis. The difference between the Greek and the Latin Vulgate, St. Jerome's translation, is so great a difference that there is a scandal."
Did they ever figure it out?
Oh yeah, they had St. Jerome, who translated from the Greek into the Latin, used a corrupt text. He didn't know it was corrupt.
So which came first, the chicken or the egg?
I always go for the chicken, but what? In which respect?
What was this person who wrote supposedly this course in metaphysics? Did he have a divine revelation and wrote it down, or did he copy from that side?
Lorenzo Valla said, "I can date it at about 5:30.
Is that fact?
And that turned out to be now.